So thank you for being here. I'm so excited. And hopefully you're all in the midst of reading Oscar Wilde right now, which I think is a tour de force. So it's my honor to introduce Professor Larque. Professor Larque teaches Chicano and Latino history of the U.S., which examines the political, economic, and social and cultural influences on Chicano Latino communities. In addition to their advances, contributions, and adaptations to the U.S., in addition, Professor Larque teaches history of Latin America, which explores the social political systems that developed after independence, the intervention of the United States, and neocolonialism in Latin America. The topics of examination in both courses are at the heart of the brief, wondrous life of Oscar Wilde. Professor Larque is a longtime Puente program mentor, is an active member of the Santa Rosa Chicano community, and is deeply committed to social justice. Laura Larque exemplifies what it means to engage in scholarly pursuits for the betterment of one's community and our society. She challenges her students and peers, myself most definitely included, to live a life of praxis, which is deep reflection and action in order to transform ourselves and our world. In her talk today, Professor Larque will help us understand the intersections of race, class, and gender in Trujillo's Dominican Republic, so we can apply this knowledge to our understanding of the brief, wondrous life of Oscar Wilde. Please join me in welcoming Professor Laura Larque.
My goodness. Can we turn this off?
Yeah, but I turned it off.
Oh, you did okay? Okay. Wow, what a wonderful presentation. I hope I do okay. You know, this morning, I was thinking, well, last night, I was thinking, why did I choose history, right? History is actually kind of depressing. And then this morning, I was showing one of my classes, a documentary on the School of the Americas. It's called The School of the Assassins. And it was established by the United States in Panama immediately after World War II. And actually, paramilitary groups, people in the armed forces, in the National Guard, counterinsurgents forces go and get trained there. And when they complete their education in this military school, they go out and literally start killing people in their own countries. And you get to see some graphic scenes. The school was moved later on to, what's the state? Georgia. And it has been there for several years. But to me, what's important is to be aware of what had happened and what continues happening, especially in Latin America. And when the English department approached me to do a lecture on the Dominican Republic, especially in the during Trujillo's dictatorship that went from like 1927 to 1961, I have been reading for the last few weeks. I read the book on Oscar Wilde, and I really like it. I found myself laughing and sometimes crying at the same time. And I am also reading right now again The Feast of the Goat by Vargas Llosa. It's a very good book too on the Dominican Republic. And Julia Alvarez also wrote a book on the Maribel sisters. So I have read those books and I said, sure, why not? I always say, sure, why not? And then I go like, why did I say yes? I am so busy. So it's not like I pulled my hair this morning, okay? It's not like that is why it's like this. It's just that sometimes it rebels, right? It's very rebellious. And as much water as I apply, it doesn't want to go down. The Lakota says, nothing is ever perfect, only Mother Earth. So don't expect perfection from you or others. Okay, let's start. Actually, the Dominican Republic is a very small country. It's part of an island. This island was divided by the French and by the Spanish. The French kept Haiti, and the Spanish kept Santo Domingo, or Dominican Republic. And nowadays, the country is populated by approximately, let me see if I can use this thing. Oh, perfect. Approximately 7.5 million people. But we always can estimate how the poverty level is in countries in Latin America by the number of immigrants who have come to the United States. Nowadays, it is estimated that Dominican Republic, people from the Dominican Republic living in the United States has increased to more than 1.5 million. It really is paralleling Cubans in relation to how many Cubans live in the United States. It's very similar between people from the Dominican Republic and the people from Cuba. So when Christopher Columbus came in 1492, the first island he encountered was the Bahamas, and immediately the Spanish call it the Hispaniola or Española, and later on it became the Dominican Republic. The people who lived there before the Spanish came were the Taino people, and they called their island Quisqueya. And Quisqueya means the mother of all lands, and also Ayiti, the land of the high mountains. And these people were actually very well organized. They were not savages as they had been depicted by history. They were organized in chiefdoms, meaning that they always elected their councils, their chiefdoms, and they were organized in 5 chiefdoms in what is nowadays Dominican Republic and Haiti. And so when Christopher Columbus arrives in 1492 and then he returns in 1493, he realizes that it is in Haiti where the gold is to be found, because Europeans want, in addition of expansion, they also want gold, as much gold as they can get. And so in Haiti, he really struck gold. And as soon as he arrived, Mr. Columbus, of course, he landed in the Bahamas, thinking that he had landed in the southern part of India. And that is why he called the Native Americans, the indigenous people, Indios. He established immediately in 1493, when he returns, a system of tribute. Every single indigenous person has to pay tribute to the Spanish, but that didn't work for a long time. Then he established the Encomienda system. And Encomienda system meant that he gave parts of the islands, of course they have expanded throughout the Caribbean islands, that he gave parts of the islands to specific group of men, 2, 3, 4 men to control, to supervise, and to, of course, make wealth for the monarchy, the Vatican, and for themselves. And of course, the people providing the labor through the Encomienda system were the indigenous people. It is estimated that when the Spanish landed second in 1493, there were approximately 8 to 10 million people in all of the Caribbean islands. Hard labor, diseases, rape, murder, claim hundreds of thousands of indigenous people within the first few months. By 1535, there are only 61,000 full-blood Native Americans alive. The Spanish had managed to wipe out in less than 40 years 10 million people. You know, when we say it like this, doesn't sound too bad, but in less than 40 years, 10 million people were wiped out from the face of the earth. By 1555, there are not full-blood Native Americans in the Caribbean islands. And by 1555, the Spanish had introduced 2 main crops into the Caribbean islands. One is sugar, and the other one is tobacco. Because there is a lack of labor force, and of course the Spanish are not going to do that work. The monarchy, the Spanish monarchy, allowed the Spanish colonies to start bringing Africans from their continent, and this is how by 1501 the slave system has been established. And the slaves were treated not any better than the indigenous people were treated. It was easier to work them to death than to keep them alive, because ships are coming and going from Africa, bringing the slaves to this continent in full boats. And so by 1511, the sugar cane from Africa has been introduced because it provides sweeter sugar. Come in, girls, don't be shy, better sugar, etc. And so the sugar cane is introduced in the Dominican Republic by 1511, and by 1516, the first sugar mill is opened in the Dominican Republic. And perhaps this will be by far the most industry that will be established in all of the Caribbean islands. And this is in general, not just to the Dominican Republic, but all of the Caribbean islands. Historically, the Caribbean islands will remain agricultural, and they will, from the very origins, they will be monocultural, meaning growing only one or two products, sugar and tobacco. So by the late 1700s, beginning of the 1800s, Spain, as a powerful country, is in a big decline. It has been invaded by France, and the Spanish are beginning to lose all of their colonies. And of course, the first colony from the Spanish to achieve their independence was the Dominican Republic, because in 1801, Toussaint Louverture had led an independence in Haiti that had been in the hands of the French. The French took that part of the colony away from the Spanish by the 1600s. And Toussaint Louverture took the Dominican Republic by force from the Spanish, and this is how the Spanish lose their precious colony. And by 1838, the local elite of the Dominican Republic began to organize themselves to be independent from Haiti. And finally, by 1844, under the leadership of Juan Pablo Duarte, the Dominican Republic becomes independent. They write their first constitution, and now they think we are free. But not really, because the Spanish imperial system was very backwards, was very obsolete in the way they govern, in the way the monarchy governed her colonies, and never allowed the people of the colonies to be part of government. So not only the Caribbean islands, but all of Latin America experience setbacks when they are trying to establish their government, because they have no experience in self-governing. The Spanish left the coffers empty. When they leave, they take everything with them. And now you have rivalries. It's very interesting. Now you have rivalries. In Latin America is the children of the Spanish, the criollos, fighting against the mestizos and the indigenous people. And in the Caribbean islands, you have the criollos, the children of the Spanish or the French, fighting against the children of the Spanish, and blacks, mulattoes, and blacks. Remember, there are no living souls that can call themselves full-blood Native American in the Caribbean. And even though a few months ago there was this big article arguing that there are some full-blood Native Americans in Puerto Rico, it had not been fully proved that they are full-blood Native Americans from the Caribbean islands. So I don't know how many of you have ever gone to any of the islands, but if you go, it's pretty much like the United States. Half is white, half is black. And some people get really surprised to see black people in the Caribbean islands further that they can speak Spanish or French. And that is a fact because the majority of the population in these islands for many centuries was the black slave, male, female children. And between the 1860s and the 1910s, the Dominican Republic, like the rest of Latin America, went through so many problems in terms of establishing a government that will provide democracy. Governments change hands constantly, and it was only a matter of time for the United States to start directly participating in the affairs of the Dominican Republic. Actually, from the 1700s, the United States has been looking at Cuba as a just natural part of the United States, and we're constantly pressuring the Spanish to sell Cuba to the United States, but the Spanish were very stubborn and never wanted to sell Cuba to the United States. So in 1898, the United States engages in a second war of expansion. The first true war of expansion was against Mexico in 1846. By 1848, the United States has taken more than half of the Mexican territory away from Mexico, all of the northern states. And in 1898, immediately after practically the Civil War, the United States is really ready to show Europe especially that this country has a very good standing army and is ready to let Europe know that Latin America is now for the United States, and that is including the Caribbean region. So in 1898, the United States declares war against Spain, and 4 months after, the United States gets Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines from Spain in exchange of $25 million, and did not get immediately Cuba because of the Teller Amendment. But once the Teller Amendment is erased and the Platt Amendment is put in place by 1902, the United States now colonizes Cuba as well as Puerto Rico. But the United States will be wise in establishing a colonial system. It will never be like the outdated colonial system Europe has been practicing. This is how the neo-colonial system was established. The United States will expand rapidly throughout Latin America, and by the beginning of the 1900s, the United States is controlling all of Latin America economy. Every single country is trading mostly with the United States, and every single country has become a monocultural economy, growing only or producing only whatever the United States wants for these countries to produce. And so the Dominican Republic will not be the exception. The United States, by 1916, has invested in the sugar economy in this country, in the Dominican Republic, and is controlling perhaps 80 to 85% of the economy of this country. And what's very interesting is that as early as 1916, the United States sends the Marines to this country, and the argument is we need to defend and protect these countries from an invasion coming from Germans, right? Because 1916 is World War I is happening, and the enemy is Germany, so we need to protect the Dominican Republic from the Germans. And I know we laugh, we go like, come on, give me a break, right? But that was the excuse the United States gave internationally. So between 1916 and 1927, the United States controlled the politics of the Dominican Republic and had the Marines constantly in this country. I skipped something. The neo-colonial system was established in a very interesting way. The United States goes to the Dominican Republic and finds some members of the elite. If the elite is like very hesitant in taking control of their country, which was very common in Latin America throughout these decades, the United States finds members of the middle class who had been in the army and begins to channel millions of dollars to this specific country, to this specific person, like how he did with Batista in Cuba, with Somoza in Nicaragua, how he did with Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. And once a government is established, this is part of the neo-colonial system, the United States allows the national people of that specific country to govern themselves, as long as these people are in a full agreement with the policies of the United States. If there is some disagreement, or if the dictator or ruler becomes greedy, the United States immediately removes this person and establishes another national person in place, as long as the policies and economic interest of the United States is being fulfilled. So, during the time of the United States occupation, the quartermaster of the new Dominican army, who was a former telegraph clerk by the name of Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, becomes the jewel of the United States. And even many presidents said this, and I'm going to repeat it exactly. He is a son of a bitch, but he is our bitch. That's what the presidents of the United States constantly said. And so the era of Mr. Trujillo, between 1927 and 1961, he became the favorite child of the United States, the favorite person of the interest of the United States. And through the help and support, especially militaristic support of the United States, Trujillo became by far one of the most ruthless dictators in the history of the world, not only the history of Latin America, but the history of the world. Not even Caligula could resemble this man. And Caligula was a horrible man, right? This man was even worse. And so Mr. Trujillo, with the beneplácit of the United States, immediately established an army and a national guard, and he wasted no time in setting up a very repressive dictatorship. And to do so, he organized a vast network of spies, paramilitary groups, National Guard, counterinsurgency groups, to eliminate any potential opponents. And he surrounded himself by very loyal people, very, very loyal men. And if one of these men was no longer serving the needs or the interests of Trujillo, Trujillo did not hesitate in disappearing this man, even if he had been his right hand. And so his henchmen or his supporters did not hesitate to use intimidation, torture, or assassinations for those who they considered their political or economic enemies, and they made sure that the entire Dominican population was oppressed to ensure the rule of Trujillo, and for Trujillo to amass a fortune as well as his henchmen, because of course some of the wealth has to spill over some of these assassins. And so, by the 1930s, Trujillo has already established his dictatorship, and he began to treat literally the Dominican Republic as his personal kingdom. And he even changed the name of the capital city, that was Santo Domingo, to Ciudad Trujillo. And this name had been in place, Santo Domingo, for centuries. Once he is out of power, the city changes the name back to how it used to be, Santo Domingo. And he was so mighty powerful that he forced everybody to call him Generalissimo or Su Excelencia, His Excellency, etc. And this is his older son, Ramfis Trujillo. What Trujillo did while he is the dictator, and this is difficult to grasp, is that he needed to prove that he was a true man, right? Not only by killing people in cold blood, but by having sex with whoever he wanted to. Even if the woman he wanted was his right man's wife, he would sleep with her, and nobody could say no to him. And that is how many women die during this regime, because many women refused to become his mistresses. His son, however, Ramfis, this man, who was, according to many, very handsome, very charismatic, did not like women per se. He liked girls who were 12, 13 years of age, perhaps all the way to 20. If you were 20 years old, you were way too old for Ramfis. And he will not hesitate to rape girls and to have parties with his friends. And in these parties, they continuously rape these girls, and at the end, if they were nice, they would just throw the body outside of a hospital, or they would just throw the body out on the streets. So this is what people were living under Trujillo's dictatorship for more than 30 years. If the young woman was white, Spanish descent, or American descent, the woman will be taken to the hospital after she is raped for several times. But if the woman is mulatta or black, she will just be thrown on the streets. So the caste system continued in existence for a very long time. And even today, we can say that a caste system is still in existence. Trujillo had 3 children, and one of them ended up completely crazy. And this man was also very crazy, a drug addict, a drunken, but really never faced any responsibilities. So with the advent of World War II, and when the United States began to fight against Korea in 1950, the demand for sugar increased, as well as the ferronickel to produce military supplies, and Trujillo began to lavish economic concessions to the United States investors. And feeling invincible, as early as the 1930s, Trujillo felt that he could mingle, or he could tell other dictators how to run their country, how to govern their country. And he was constantly challenging dictators in other countries. And some dictators were good friends of him, like Batista, like Somoza, and there are many pictures that he took with these 2 men. But I guess there was still a resentment, an old resentment against Haiti, because Haiti had invaded the Dominican Republic in 1801 and claimed the Dominican Republic to be part of Haiti. So Haiti is already a very poor country. And many of the men and women from Haiti are crossing the border to work in the sugar plantations. And they had established themselves. They had been squattering in the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And just because Trujillo is very upset about the constant migration of people from Haiti coming to the Dominican Republic, he ordered his henchmen to kill, to massacre in just a matter of a few days, close to 30,000 Haitians. And this came to be known as the Parsley Massacre. And at this time, the United States told him, go slow, go gentle, we don't want to have any problems. You should allow some of the people from Haiti to come work in your country. And finally, by 1952, the Dominican Republic and Haiti signed a treaty in which Trujillo allowed workers from Haiti coming to labor in the sugar fields. And actually, this became nothing else than a true slave system. Many people ended up leaving because they were indeed suffering, working without relief, with hardly any money. And so by going back to the Dominican Republic, in order to control the population that was enlarged, perhaps 6, 7 million people, and many were dying. Thousands of people were being killed every single year. But by, to be able to further control the Dominican population, by 1950, Trujillo has established 7 categories of intelligence agencies. And what that means is that the government is constantly checking every single member of the population in different ways. All citizens, male, female, from perhaps very young age, are required to carry identification cards. And if a bus is stopped or the police comes to your neighborhood and wants to check everybody to see if everybody has their identification cards, if you don't have your card, rest assured that you will be taken and your family perhaps will never see you again. And the secret police was responsible for giving good conduct passes or good conduct IDs to the population in general. And so if you really didn't have your ID, the police, the secret police, the secret service, paramilitary groups were fast in arresting people, torturing people, murdering people, and thousands of people were killed every year, people who were considered opponents to Trujillo's government. The stories tell us that if you were taken to 2 places, one was La Victoria, the victory, or La Cuarenta, the 40. These were clandestine prison systems. You were dead. You would never return. So it was common for people to be tortured first and then killed. Their bodies would be dismembered. Often they were burned. Often the government had a favorite place in the ocean in which the bodies were constantly thrown and to feed the sharks. The 42, under the leader, Miguel Angel Paulino, this man right there, Miguel Angel Paulino, drove to the streets. They always had red cards. They were always driving through the streets of all of the Dominican Republic. And these cars or car came to be known as the car of death, because if you were taken in one of these cars, you will never return to your family, alive or dead. If they felt sorry for you, they will throw the body in a sack outside your family's house. Otherwise, you will never know what happened to your family member. And so all of the imprisonments and killings were handled by the Servicio de Inteligencia Militar, intelligence, military service. And Trujillo established 3 more organizations or institutions to carry on the repression. El Partido Dominicano, in which, or the Dominican Party, in which they pretended to hold elections once in a while, the National Guard, and the Agencias de Espionaje, or the espionage agencies. And these 3 other organizations were in charge of bringing discipline to the people in the Dominican Republic. And what it meant, if the army comes to your neighborhood or the army comes to your city, it means that there will be a massacre. And the man in charge of the Servicios de Inteligencia, or the SIM, was this man, Johnny Aves. So Johnny Aves was in charge of the SIM, S-I-M, and it was very common to be arrested, but the people who were arresting you were called, and I know this is graphic, but if we can stomach some of the movies that we watch daily or programs, we can stomach some facts, right? The people who were always conducting the arrest or the kidnaps were called the Calis. And if you were taken by the Calis, again, you never returned. So the purpose of burning the bodies was so that the families will never be able to recognize their loved ones. And here is Mr. John Aves. The way he was recruited was very interesting. Paulino had sent him to Mexico throughout the 1930s and 1940s to operate as a spy against the people who had migrated from the Dominican Republic to Mexico. In Mexico, he marries this woman, and when Trujillo learns as to how efficient Aves has been in Mexico, he sends for him, and he comes back to the Dominican Republic. When you read some of the stories about this man, you will be so afraid to have him as your neighbor seriously, because he was considered a sociopath. He began killing animals from a very young age, and he had really no emotional response to the killings. So whenever something needed to happen, the strong man came to the aid of Trujillo. And his wife, it is said that his wife was a lot like him. So are we already depressed? Isn't this horrible? So Trujillo felt invincible. Trujillo was killing people not only in the Dominican Republic, but was killing people who had gone on political asylum to other countries, including the United States, and who dared to be critical of his dictatorship, his regime. Toward the end of his dictatorship, he noticed these 3 beautiful sisters. And what he used to do in order to single out women, he would hold these balls, these big dances, right? And he pretended to be like in a European country. He will dress in his military regalia with his hats with feathers. And everybody from the elite were supposed to come to these balls and bring their daughters and their wives. And he will choose parade around, looking at all the women. And he will choose women for that specific night or for longer time. And of course, he forced the parents of these 3 young women bring them to the dances. And he wanted to rape, because I call it rape, one of these young women, and she resisted him many times. At the same time, they had already organized these women with other male and females from the Dominican Republic, a movement called the June 14 movement to end the dictatorship. And because they resisted, these three young women resisted his advances, he ordered his men to kill them. And he did not hesitate in killing the three sisters. So this was international news. He was going far, very far, but he was the, by 1960, the United States is not liking Trujillo a whole lot. Not because he has been killing people left and right, but we will see why. Before he killed the sisters, this man, Jesus Maria de Galindez, had gone on exile to the United States. And is active denouncing the atrocities of Trujillo's dictatorship. Well, Trujillo sent spies to kill him, and this was fired back against him. And he feared that the United States were going to come and reprimand him. In order to have no witnesses, he ordered the assassination of the men who killed Galindez. No problem, we just get rid of them. By the end of the, I found this picture and I said, oh, we have to put this picture on, you know, Nixon and Trujillo. And you really get to see how friendly these two countries were, right? Because Trujillo is serving the interest of the United States. However, him, like a few other dictators, became greedy. And in his greed, he began to expand his control to the investments of the United States in the Dominican Republic. He began to take some of the land that belonged to the United States. He began to take control of some of the industries that were the industries of the United States. And when he began to do so, in a similar fashion later on, what's his name? I always forget his name. Noriega, Manuel Noriega. I don't know if you have heard of him. Manuel Noriega was also a jewel of the United States from Panama. But when Noriega became very, very, very greedy and began to take part of the drug contraband that belonged to the United States, well, the United States didn't like it. And it was Reagan, the president at that time in the United States, and immediately arrested Noriega under stupid accusations, and even Nancy Reagan began to accuse him of being part of this cult, right? Devilish cult. So people are very unhappy with Trujillo during this time, and of course he is no longer serving the United States purposes to keep the U.S. investments safe. And the CIA collaborated with several men in the Dominican Republic to close the ranks and to wait for him when he was going one morning to see one of his lovers, and he is assassinated on 1961. And immediately the secret police began to send pictures throughout all of the neighborhoods, all of the cities, looking for the men who were accused of killing Trujillo. And there were like 12 men involved, but you saw pictures like this. So it's very interesting. Do we call them assassins, or do we call them heroes? Because they finally, through violence, got rid of the dictator. But that really did not bring democracy to the Dominican Republic even to date, because the country has not been able to establish through democratic elections a democratic government. So now let's move on to discuss briefly, isn't he handsome? Seriously. My God, I know the men are going to say, oh, what do I care? But ladies, isn't he handsome? I think he really is. And you see his pictures over and over in the internet. This is Junot Diaz. He is the writer of the Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. And he has written other books. And I don't know when was it, January, February, Abby, another, I can never say her last name, another English professor asked me, oh, can you do a lecture on the Dominican Republic? And I said, sure, why not? I read the book, and I really liked the book. I don't know how many of you are writing it. And I'm sure if we ask Angela, Lauren, myself, and other people who are reading the book, we will have a different opinion. We will have a different perspective of the book. And that is the beauty of reading not just history book novels, right? We take what is familiar to us. We take what really in some ways apply to our realities, to our culture, our gender, our background. So this is a very interesting book written by Junot Diaz, The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. And I really like it because it takes part in both countries, the United States and, of course, the Dominican Republic. And as I was reading the book, I saw all these passages that he brings in constantly, the history of the Dominican Republic, specifically the dictatorship of Trujillo. And as you are reading the book, you read the footnotes, but sometimes that is not enough because we need to have a better background on the history of the Dominican Republic. And one of the first things that you read in the book is the Foucault, or Foucault. What is the Foucault, right? And I started thinking, what the heck is the Foucault? Because we don't have that saying in the country I come from, Mexico. But then I said, you know, the Foucault is La Maldición de Malinche, right? For those who are Latin America, that is the Foucault. The Foucault is nothing else than the legacy of the European arrival. All the problems Native Americans and blacks began to face once the Europeans landed in this continent. It's like the legacy, or is the curse, right? Many people look at it as the curse of the Europeans, not all Europeans, but those who came with the intention of becoming rich overnight at the expense of the indigenous people and Africans. And so what the Europeans, what the Spanish specifically left was a legacy of a caste system in which the Spanish made sure that they assign a status to people not only in relation to their class, but also to their skin color, their race, ethnic background. And Latin America, as well as the United States, continues living this caste and class system. And you may improve your class, but because of your skin color, because of your ethnic background, your caste will never be improved. You can never leave your caste. And perhaps we don't see it so much in the United States, but if you are to travel to any of the islands in the Caribbean islands, perhaps with the exception of Cuba, you will immediately sense the race relations in these islands and how separate they are from one another. And I don't know if you notice, every single picture I show you of the workers in the sugar cane, they are always black. it really is not a coincidence that the sugar cane workers, the workers in the mills, etc., are historically black. So racism, sexism, and class struggle have always existed in the Dominican Republic. But these were exacerbated under the Trujillo dictatorship that left a very painful legacy for the generations, the 2 or 3 generations after Trujillo's dictatorship, because people still remembering and people still living what Trujillo left behind. And what's very interesting about any society, especially in this continent, is that we tend to create a syncretic culture, not just religion, but culture, in which we blend the spiritual beliefs, in this case, Dominican Republic, African spiritual beliefs, mixed with the Christian beliefs. And so, in a way, Native Americans and blacks have come to practice this mixed culture, mixed relation. You take a Christian saint, because they are Catholics, you take a Christian saint, but you also have your black or Native American spiritual symbol, parallel it. And so you have a Virgin of the Oceans, and you have an Orisha representation of the oceans. And this is how people live, this is how people write. And that's why I really like Junot Diaz. To me, when I look at Belly, how many of you are reading this book? All right, good. When I look at Belly, Belly to me represents the historical struggle for gender, class, and race equality. Of course, we know that Belly is black. And the way Junot Diaz describes her, she's this beautiful, strong young woman that was not even defeated by the dictatorship and was saved by another spirit, right? And you may try to look for the spirit. I am even the golden mangoes. So what is the golden mangoes that comes and saves Belly at that time? And then her son Oscar is also saved by the golden mangoes at least one time. So to me, the life of Belly and her son Oscar go through a full circle, right? Not only here in the United States, but especially in the Dominican Republic. And they represent the gender and race struggle in this country. Belly represents, you know, the Dominican Republican woman that continues fighting not only for equality, gender equality, but especially caste race equality. Because in countries like the Dominican Republic, you are first black, and then you are a woman. And that is a fact, right? They don't see you first as a woman and then as black. When it comes to racism, you are first black, and then you are a man or you are a woman. And so, so Belly represents the struggle for equality in the Dominican Republic. But what is that Oscar represents? I was really attracted to Oscar's character, because Oscar represents the struggle not only of being an immigrant, right, or the child of an immigrant, second immigrant generation, but he represents the struggle of growing up in the United States under the Dominican traditions, under the Dominican culture. And he becomes a hero because he is not defeated by the United States culture, and he is not defeated, of course, by the Dominican Republic culture. Even though he's killed in the Dominican Republic, he gets what he wanted, right? And so, but Oscar also represents the generations, the generation of immigrants, perhaps the first and second generation of immigrants. And what Oscar represents, perhaps even more than Belly, is the dilemma in which he lives. He lives in the United States, and he has in his house with his community the Dominican Republic culture, and he is living in a web of two worlds, right? He has to balance both worlds. And really, it's not a wonder why he escapes into all of these games and technology and books that he likes to read, because they are so far apart from his reality. And that is why when the book starts talking about these games and books he reads, I was like, I have no idea what this is talking about. But another interesting, what Oscar represents to me is that Oscar, in reality, doesn't have a true cultural identity. As a second immigrant generation, he is trying to establish his own identity, his own roots. Is he an American or is he a Dominican? In the school, the white kids tell him, you are not an American. When he goes to the Dominican Republic, the Dominicans tell him, you are not Dominicano, right? Because you don't speak perfect Spanish, because you don't behave like this, you don't behave like, it's like being in limbo, not really having his very own identity. And as a historian, the way I interpreted it is how Latin America was in the 1800s. When Latin America becomes independent from Spain, from Portugal, from France, these countries really did not have an identity, a cultural identity that they could say, this is our identity, this is us, because they were a wide spectrum of different classes, of different ethnic groups, different castas, that it took them several decades, almost to the end of the 1800s, for countries in Latin America to have this very nationalistic view. We are Dominicans, we are Mexicans, we are Argentinians. They really had to work hard in developing their identity, moving away from the European cultural trend to be able to create their very own culture, their very own trend. And that is why I really like the book, because I truly identify Oscar with perhaps that was not the intention of Junot Diaz, but that's how I truly identified Oscar. And another beauty of Latin American writers that I consider is a beauty, I have a few pictures here, is that this trend started in Latin America by the late 1950s, beginning of the 1960s, and these writers are attempting to project the reality of the people in their country by blending syncretism, by blending the different cultures that made the culture of their country. And I am talking specifically about the magic realism, in which you blend superstition, mythology, if you may, with your reality. And you say it so often, you live it so often, that you come to believe that it is true, right? Like the fuku, or like this other, the mangoes, what's the name of this thing? The golden mangoes. And at some point, you truly believe that that is a fact, that that is part of your reality. These writers, all of these writers, write not only with the magic realism, and also depicting their reality, their lives closer to the reality in which they live, instead of making this, Walt Disney paradise. They write about their history. They blend history with life, with daily life. And this is called costumbrismo. And it hasn't even been translated. Costumbrismo means that it brings the cultural ideas, inferences. It brings a real universe, a view on the universe about our lives, the detail of our lives. And there is a way that we tell our lives. through costumbrismo. And my favorite writer is not Junot Diaz. This is my favorite. Oops, sorry. Don't you love this new PowerPoint? I've been playing with it a lot in the last few weeks, and I go, oh, this is so jazzy. If you really want to read some real magic realism, read this man and this man. Carlos Fuentes, and oh my God, he's my favorite, and I am forgetting his name. He wrote El Llano en Llamas and Pedro Páramo. Juan Rulfo. He is the best writer in the world. He only wrote 2 or 3 books, and not very thick, thin books, but you know, if you read him, you will fall in love with magic realism. Carlos Fuentes, of course, wrote many books. Mario Benedetti from Uruguay, he's also one of my favorite writers. This is Allende. What's her first name? Isabel Allende. Oh, thank you, ladies. This is Julia Alvarez, the one who wrote about the Mirabal sisters. This is one of my latest favorites. She's a member of the ruling class in Mexico, Guadalupe Loesa. And I love her because she writes mocking, criticizing, making fun of the Mexican ruling class. And what better is to read how ridiculous they are, right? Piri Thomas from Puerto Rico, Sandra Cisneros, and another one of my favorites, Elena Poniatowska. And the last but not least, this is how this new trend of writers are writing. And some of my students are reading some of the books, and they go like, this is crazy. Why is that the writer don't write linear? I want to read from when he's born to when he dies. I don't want to start reading when he dies and then go back in different ways to when he's born. They write to what I call the spiral writing. Different themes, different topics. The characters are developed in different ways instead of the linear way that we are used to be reading. Thank you. Questions? Questions? We have like 2 minutes. Yeah.
I have a question about what the Dominican Republic is after post Trujillo.
After Trujillo, it has had different presidents. It has had different rulers. But to date, the Dominican Republic is not a democratic country. Security or what?
Like, do they want anything like that before? Because in that poster you said it said that once you killed the boss.
Yeah, once you kill the boss, those who have been close to him fight to keep the power. And that continues happening until the people finally elects a democratic president. And that hasn't happened in the Dominican Republic. Any other questions? Thank you for coming. How do I? Yes, you can write a paper on it. Yes, honey.
How much writing do you want?
2 pages, like, oh, let me turn this off. 2 pages.